let's start over.
Oh
I
no,
was like
hell
about to
no. We're
cough.
gonna keep rolling this,
All
man.
right, all right. I was like trying not to cough right as I was talking. I was like,
That's why I was waiting for you to have your drink, and I'm like, ready? All right, here we go.
all
Record.
right, ready, set, go. Fuck it. Imperfect action. Let's just do it. So, welcome to the process. I'm Wesley. This is my partner in crime and the love of my life, Marco. Um, and today we're talking about change because yesterday I needed some change and Marco couldn't spot me because he's broke, so he couldn't spot
Bro,
me any cash. No, I'm
this-
just kidding. Not that kind of change. I realized yesterday I'm making a couple big changes in my life, and I realized that the courage to make change and not making change are the two reasons why is like the story of most people's lives, right? The people that, like Sigmund Freud said, I was telling Marco before we started recording, most men live lives of quiet desperation. That's a quote from Sigmund Freud there. And that's basically a story of people just staying the way they are for their whole entire life until they die,
yeah.
and there's a quiet desperation that they never really realize. And then there's the story of people that make that change and take that leap, but give up, right? Like I'm sure you've heard, you've probably had a lot of older people in your life, or we've all had those friends or whatever that talked about that, how they had the idea for Uber but could never actualize on it or whatever.
Right.
And so I thought it would be a good conversation to open up. And Marco, if you want to add any um, thoughts on that,
Oh, dude.
just to start off.
Yeah, no, it's I have friends who are in their 70s. I have, their 60s, 50s. Um, I'm in my 40s, 30s, 20s, right? So I've got this like very huge swath as far as the age groups. And this past weekend was the 30th year anniversary high school reunion. I didn't go. Not that I didn't want to. I just chose to work instead, and it's also hours away. Um, and you'll this is the thing that I've noticed in life. Like there are some people who will stay stuck back when they peaked, right? And change is a constant. It's the only constant in this life. We can't fight it. We can't avoid it. Your body's going to change as you grow older. If you're not taking care of it, it's going to gain weight. You're going to develop some sort of disease. If you don't change your mode of thinking about things, you're not going to develop as a person. Um, so it's like it's like you have to constantly adapt to the times as well, right? What used to work for the baby boomers doesn't work for Gen X and doesn't work for millennials and whatever. Like, I mean, I'm just using those labels just to, give place markers. I think those labels are just retarded because number one, they're just hard to keep up with and it doesn't really matter. I think. Um, and the reason why I bring it up, it's just like, the days of, why don't you just go to the company and knock on the door and shake hands and give them a resume and you'll get a job. And it's just like, no, no, this is a different world, right? And they're just with the advent of everything, just technology being everywhere,
Mhm.
AI coming in and potentially disrupting, AI and robotics potentially disrupting our lives to the point to where there might be a universal basic income that gets put into play. And what sort of change are people are they going to have to adapt to, right? Um, I know this is all over the place, and bear with me on that one. I'm just trying to get my bearings with it. Pun intended. I'm just trying to get my bearings, so please bear with me while I'm getting my bearings about talking about change. Uh,
Well, there's so many angles to take with it, right? Because change, you could have a conversation about change for people that just experience the loss of something, whether it's someone that they love that died, or a relationship that ended, or a season of their life that is no longer there. They have to turn the chapter, they have to move. I've experienced all of those chapters. I'm sure everybody has, of, moving from your childhood home into your new apartment. first apartment, and that experience is pretty like, whoa, okay, childhood's over. Now it's time to step
Yeah.
into manhood.
Yeah.
Um, Dealing with like a loss, So there's that version of change is like coping with change and being willing to embrace change. And then there's also the courage to change. And there's a couple quotes that I ChatGPT fed me about change from Stoicism, and I'm gonna pick out some of the ones that I love so far that I've been seeing. Um, Marcus Aurelius said, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." So he's basically saying, when you lose something, it's change, and change is inevitable. Nature loves that. Um, Seneca said, "No man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." So even
Seneca
the
took that from Heraclitus.
okay, interesting. So maybe you can delve into that, but
Well, I'm just saying, and probably Heraclitus took that from somebody else, right? So, like,
right,
philosophy is one of those things that it's kind of like the history of itself,
the
right?
idea is the
So,
same. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, the idea is, I mean, that was so Seneca said that, the pre-Socratic Heraclitus said that, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure that goes even further back. But yes, you cannot step in the same river twice because it's always flowing, and that's the thing. Life is a flow, and one of the biggest things. What's funny, I was thinking the thing, and you said it. A big part of it is the acceptance of change, accepting that change is inevitable, and also reframing change as a good thing. Change is good ultimately. You can Jocko it, you can silver line it, you can however farther back you want to, because Jocko's not the first guy to say reframe things into good. He just did it in his way with extreme ownership and him being a Navy SEAL, and it got marketed to the new generation, right? It's these ideas have been around for fucking ever, and they just keep getting marketed by, and I hate to use those terms, but it just seems very apt,
yeah,
right? Because it goes back to what's being sold, and I don't necessarily mean from a salesy perspective. I'm literally meaning like when you're sold on something, right? When you're sold on an idea, when you're sold on reality, when you're sold on the relationship that you're in, it's always that, and it's about that change, and it's about the change that you want to see in yourself, right? Who do I want to become? What version of life do I want to be living? Am I sold on that? And how do we
yeah,
get sold on shit? It's got to feel right. A lot of people say, well, I'm
yeah,
very logical, and the logic's got to line up. And it's like, you can fucking logic it all you want, and you're going to need to have some type of emotional basis to justify that logic.
right. Logic is based on axiomatic beliefs that you ingrained based on the emotions that you felt about the experience you know you had, the perception you had of an experience, right? Like you perceived, like you can have a bunch of logical arguments. That's why there's debates, right? Is like two guys that are super logical but come to different conclusions. You have to base that logic on certain axiomatic beliefs that you have about the world that could conflict with another person. Like you and I have probably different axiomatic beliefs about the world, or at least at different points in time. And we've accumulated those beliefs about the world based on our perception of the world and how we feel about it and how we reacted to it, right? Some people think that men are the root of all evil because they've had toxic men in their life, and then that just justifies everything, and then their brain shows them the evidence that it's true, and da 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 da. So I guess a lot of this is like the spirit of having a spirit of change, a spirit of growth. It's hard because that quote about not stepping in the same river twice, people hold on to things. I'm thinking of a lady that used to go to the church. She's an older lady, but she's lived in the same house her whole entire life. She inherited it from her family. She's gone to the same exact church. She's done the same exact thing. And she said she's like, she doesn't like change. She likes the same exact thing. But if I take this quote that Seneca said, she's actually living in a corpus of what used to be. It's not actually the same thing, right? Like the story of the man that, had love's a good relatable example, like this intense love for a woman, right? At one point, that was a beautiful budding romance, but 50 years down the road, when she's already moved on and he's still grieving her, he's just the sad, lonely guy that that's his story, right? The story of the guy that fell in love, what that looks like is the growth that happened after that, right? Like if you were really to hold on to that spirit of whatever when he fell in love, that would have been, if they break up, he uses that to inspire him to adventure or whatever, not the holding on to something that's already gone, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But in his mind, it is. He's like, I don't want to let go of that thing because I love it so much. But in reality, the love that he had is has evolved into a different expression, right? Like, and men know this very well because we've all dealt with heartbreak and we've all had to transmute it into positive energy, whether that's like going to the gym or just like making
Yeah.
something of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the greatest love stories have come from heartbreak, from that soul crushing, heartbreaking change in life. Nothing's not there's nothing is permanent, right? There's another thing, right? To embrace to embrace impermanence. That's, I would say, there's there's the absolute statement of saying there's no such thing as absolute statements, which is always this funny wordplay thing. But I think there are certain statements that are absolutes, such as change is constant, or the inverse of that, nothing is permanent. you know, or another version of that is everything's in a state of impermanence, right? It's always in flux, right? Same as Seneca was requoting Heraclitus, and whoever Heraclitus was requoting as well about stepping in. You can't step in the same river twice. The woman you were mentioning, think about how many people are stuck. It's like a living death. They're afraid of change. They're insecure about it, right? The home becomes a living tomb. She inherited it from her family. I wouldn't be surprised if it's still decorated with the same stuff that her mom or her grandmother had up in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's that nostalgia. Nostalgia is a type of definitely it's a type of hanging on to. When people talk about the good old days, what do you mean the good old days? Well, back in the 50s. Oh, what? When women didn't have this and minorities didn't have that? Like, it wasn't great for everybody. And then in these days, like, well, these days, this, and that. Kids don't respect this and that. And yet they find an ancient cuneiform tablet, if I'm not mistaken, that says the same shit that we're saying today about kids doing this and people doing that, and everybody's writing a book. And so, for as much change as we see with our technology and our fashion and our architecture and science and mathematics and philosophy, there is still something that still remains the same. That's like this basic component of the human condition.
Yeah.
That
Things
that
aren't stagnant.
Well, things aren't stagnant. But what I'm saying is this: is that for as much change as we experience in this life, as humans, we still remain fundamentally flawed, where we're in this state of lacking. So let's think about that. What I mean by that is this: is like, the reason why entrepreneurship exists is because it's feeding a lack, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want to be happier, they want to be healthier, and they want to be wealthier, right? The three things that business takes care of, however you want to define it. Now, the methods to take care of those needs have changed over time, but the principles still remain the same in that regard, right? It's just like the human story, the human drama, the human narrative. It's always the same, dude. It's always the same. It's just the mask, the avatar is a little bit different. You have a
Right.
red beard. I have a white and black beard. Yet we want similar things in our lives. Not exactly, but similar. And I think that's
Yeah.
across the board. I doubt there's one person that wants to fucking live a horrible life. And if they do, fuck, that sucks. And how entertaining too.
And I think if we lived on a long enough plane of time and just had enough time to understand the context of what happens to us, things would make sense. But we live in this impermanent, mortal body where we only experience a certain amount of time, and we don't have infinite knowledge of how everything works and how the story actually connects. And because I was thinking like that concept, you either grow or die, right?
Right.
And that's change, right? Like you can't, there is no stagnation with living things. You're either changing this way or changing that way, right? So even just that basic concept implies that the story of one's life or just things that happen or whatever can't be understood by the snapshot of what happened, but kind of like by the story arc of how it panned out, if that makes sense. So to illustrate, I was looking at my plant and I was like, if I had planted this, like I don't know what this is actually. It's like a coffee plant. And I was like, if I had like planted the seed in the bucket and then just like wanted it to stay there, like I get so fixated on like, it's just I just started it. It felt so good that I planted it and I just want it to stay that way forever. Right? Like that's not like, yes, you can hold on to that version of like what you want the plant to be, but the actual story of this plant is that not only did I plant it, that was one moment in time of that plant story. I planted it, cool, but you also water it, right? And then it grows and then it bears fruit, not this thing, but let's say like it bears fruit and then the person eats it. And then like we don't realize that everything's connected to everything else and everything has its own story, right? If you were to take a snapshot of like a movie and just like pause there because you really like that one scene and you're like, I just want to hold on to that scene, then you lose context for the whole story, right?
Yep.
And I think that that's pertinent to our lives, right? Is like a lot of times we're holding on to a chapter of our life that's already passed
Yeah.
and we're not letting it we're not letting the story finish and
Yep.
conclude.
Yep.
And that in a sense is killing ourselves, right? We do that with addiction and these different things to cope, where we kind of like hold on to things. That analogy of like you got all this baggage on you and stuff.
Yep.
It's kind of like the same thing. Like
Yep.
we're not letting the chapter turn. We're not letting
Yep.
that story evolve. And so consequently we're dying. We're
Yep.
killing ourselves
Yeah.
slowly,
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
it's when people they call when people hang on to those glory days as they call them. You know, when you like, it would be awkward for you to get together with your buddies at 27. You're almost 27, right?
Yeah, in January I'm 27.
January. So it would be awkward for you at 27 to get together with your pals and be like, man, remember when we were 12, how fast I could run? It's not as opposed to, let's say you get to my age and you're hanging out with some dude from high school and he's like, dude, remember in high school when we used to, and it's like, why are we talking about that? Or even weirder, somebody in their 70s talking about the glory days again and not evolving and not accepting where they're at. It's like we're not the same person who we used to be, and some people just hang on to that fucking identity like it's life and death. I mean, literally, you've got men who will fucking dye their beards and dye their hair to fucking
Mhm.
keep looking young, and it looks so fucking weird on them, right? It's like they got the fucking wrinkles and it's all black, and it's just like, why are you doing that, dude? Like, what are you hanging on to?
Yeah.
You know, or when they decide to, you know, the best one is when guys, if they'll refer to some shit like when they used to be an athlete in college, and I'm like, and why'd you stop? Why'd you stop taking care of yourself?
Right.
Who gives a fuck what you were in college? Now it's 20, 30, 40 years fucking later. What are you doing now? And that's the thing, right? When we've talked about this, when people get stuck in the past, they get angry and resentful. When they shoot too far into the future, they get anxious. So again, the best place to be is here and now, because this is the only place to be. The
Hmm.
continual unfolding of the present moment. That snapshot that you were talking about in a film where people are trying to hang on to. That's the one of the saddest things to see with somebody. because they're missing
Yeah.
out on fucking life. They're missing out on the experience of this whole thing. That it's like everything has a season. Everything's got a season. It's all, but here's the funny thing. Everything has a season. It's all cyclical, right? You're gonna go through a summer, you're gonna go through a fall and a winter and back into a spring. What do they say? Every 7 years, the cells of your body basically replace themselves with other cells. This universe has been around 13.8 billion years, according to current estimates.
Mhm.
The galaxy that our solar system is in is still exploding. It's still moving from the explosion that originally, like we are still moving through space. We're not still. This planet is spinning around as it's circling around the sun.
Yeah.
You know, it's fucking maddening. Like if you sit there and think about all the different shit that's happening everywhere all at once, all at the same time,
Yeah.
and then of course, right, like in the space that we exist and work and play in, the sales space, the high ticket space, and all the fucking self-important fucking peacocks, and I did this and I did that and I'm making this much money and I am so fucking cool, I'm badass, and look at my content and blah 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 blah. Okay, in 100 years you're dead. Who gives a fuck about you?
Yeah.
It's like
I
the
mean,
fucking pharaohs, dude.
I'm trying to think about like why I hold on to things because I can't speak for other people, but like I feel like because if anyone's guilty of this, it's definitely me, like holding on to things in the
All
past
of
and
us do. We all hang
letting
on to it.
years go by.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I believe that my best days are behind me. And my, it's this belief that like the happiness that you wanted was back there and the future is this dark, scary place. But in reality, when you are willing to move on, because I've also done that. I've also embraced change and adventure, and it's scary, right? But like when you embrace that change and that adventure, you find the meaning of what that thing was. You discover what the meaning of that was. You're able to cope with it as you grow. Like the path reveals itself to you. Like, oh, this is why I went through that relationship. This is why I experienced that tragedy, because it taught me this. It was preparing me for this.
Yeah.
And I just don't think we allow ourselves, and we've had friends that have committed suicide and all sorts of crazy stuff, and they don't allow themselves to just see their life on a longer plane than what they're willing to. They're not patient enough to like see things on just a longer spectrum of you're feeling this way right now and your perception is this, but if you just made that positive change for yourself, I think the answer would reveal itself to you, right? I think you would be able to create meaning out of what happened or out of your life if you embrace that change, right? You're just stuck and fixated on this one part of your story that isn't ideal. But like how beautiful is it to have a story of like you're literally in the pit and the rut at rock bottom and you climb your way out, right? Like Rocky style, right?
Yeah.
Like you can create that story for yourself
Yeah.
if you allow yourself time and make that positive change. So there's the reality that change is inevitable. So whether we like it or not, it's going to happen and shit's going to happen and you're going to die and I'm going to die and people in my life are going to die that I love. Like my grandpa that I respect very much and am very close to, like someday he's going to die, right? In the
Yeah.
next 10 years. And I think about that to like process it so that I'm ready for it. But it's like, even people that haven't experienced tragedy or their life is so bland and basic to where they kind of like, who gives a fuck what Wes is saying right now? Because my life's okay, whatever, just fuck it. Like eventually you're gonna experience something, right? We
Yeah.
we all we're all gonna die. So I think that's important to talk about too, is like um not just accepting change and like coping with it and understanding that it's just a reality that just is never going to change for lack of a better word, but also having the courage to embrace positive change and the bravery it takes, instead of like holding on to, like I said, that seed and never letting it grow, right? Because we've heard that quote, every action that we do is a seed. What's the do you know what phrase, what quote I'm talking about? Every
I've
moment.
it sounds familiar. I don't know it off the top of my head, but the thing that popped up for me is trying to hold on to water when you try to
Mhm.
grasp water and you can't. And that I think it's a very similar thing. Is again going back to that woman you were talking about. She's trying to crystallize a moment in her life that she was perceiving as her better days, right? That's probably a house that she grew up in, and she probably really liked her childhood. And so she's trying to capture that and relive that over and over and over again, right? Kind of shitty. And the thing is, this is like, that's when you were talking about earlier saying, my best days are behind me. That's the glory days things. It's just like,
Yeah.
nah, fuck that, man. It's like I'm of the perspective where I look forward to the future because in some odd way, I feel like my best days are ahead of me. In some weird way, I feel like I'm just getting started. Like I'm feeling more comfortable with who I am, feeling more comfortable in my skin, feeling more comfortable with my flaws, feeling more comfortable with my lack of intelligence in certain things. Feeling it's just I'm more okay with not being okay with certain things and knowing that I can learn, I can improve, that this never ends. And that took a while to accept. And yeah, granted, there are days when I'm not too stoked on how things are turning out. And it takes a little bit for me to go, but this is part of it. This is part of the process. you know? And
Yeah.
knowing that it's gonna be okay. Like here's the thing, dude. Like at some point, this universe is going to, this is what they think so far. At some point, this universe is going to experience what they call heat death, where there are no more new particles being created. Even the black holes themselves will die out. And then just doom, nothing for this universe. And we're talking like trillions of years into the future. Too vast of a thing for us to comprehend. Like short our lives are in comparison. And
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of it is like we're here and ultimately like what are the most important things in this life? And the only thing that I can think of is love and the relationships we have with ourselves, with our friends, with our families, with
Mm.
with life. What's default mode of human? Default mode of human is to basically have a fixed mindset. Let's just break it down in its simplest fashion. Default mode of human is a fixed scarcity, fear-based mindset. And for good reason. Let's think about our evolutionary days and how rough that was back in the day when we were small tribes worried about fucking big animals and other tribes. And that's speaking from a man perspective, not from a fucking woman perspective, because that was even rougher for them. And now that we live in this modern day world of abundance and technology, and basically, like, dude, obesity is a problem.
Yeah.
Obesity. That is a consequence of having too much,
Yeah.
right?
It's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? Like this in this world, we have a starvation problem in some parts and an obesity problem in another part.
I wonder if depression is obesity of the mind, like having too much thoughts to think about.
Well, that's pretty good.
Um, but but I just wanted to, I know we're coming close to our time, but
Wrap it up for us, buddy.
yeah, I don't know if I have a powerful enough point for that, but basically we need to realize that change, I think the impetus of making change is realizing that we're in a constant state of change, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
It's just, is this change something that is for our better self, the version of ourselves that's going to exist across time? Or is this change decaying us, uh, moment after moment? The guys that hold on to the past, right? They're freezing themselves. And then if you look 10 years down the road, they're overweight, they're whatever, like they're stuck in this thing where they weren't, progressing. They weren't taking care of themselves. Um, Bruce Lee has a quote that I thought about that I wanted to read. He says, if you always put limits on everything you do, physical or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. There are no limits. There are only plateaus, and you must not stay there. You must go beyond them. So that quote to me is just a call to change, a call to embrace change. And like I said, we all have we're all participating in change. One change could be the spirit of a coward, and the spirit of fear that causes us to self-deteriorate across time. We think that we're being stagnant. We think that we're comfortable and we're just like doing the same thing, clocking in, clocking out, same job, same, everything's the same. But if you look at your life across time, the version of me when I started that job versus the version of me in 20 years when I'm an old man and I'm bitter, right? Like I used to work with a guy that had the same exact construction job as me. He was like 55 years old and he hated me because I was a 19-year-old kid in the same exact position as him. And at one point in time, he was a 19-year-old kid
Yep.
that made that decision for himself that he's
Yep.
going to have this spirit of complacency, or
Yeah.
basically like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to let life change for me and not take responsibility for the change.
It's life happening to me it's life happening to me instead of for me.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So again, interesting that this came back to like an identity thing, but it all comes down, like we're all experiencing change. We got to decide what spirit of change do we want to allow to manifest in our body, in this vessel that we have, as this character that we're playing in the world. Do we want to embody a spirit of fear, a spirit of courage, bravery, right? And if you think about it like that and you think of your life as a story, and having a call to adventure versus being the Bilbo Baggins that maybe he stayed back and just had 9 square meals a day and never went on that adventure, and the book was never written, and he was just that fat, happy old hobbit that just died in the Shire
Right.
because he didn't want to, like, yeah, I don't know if I have a point to that, but just a realization.
Well, that guy you're talking about, the 55-year-old, that's 7 years away from me. I turned 48 in November, and that's 7 years away from me. And I know the exact kind of guy you're talking about. He probably smoked cigarettes. He
Hmm.
probably drank beer after work. Probably did a
Hmm.
little tweak when you guys were doing the nighttime work and stuff. And he's like, you know what? When I was your age, brother, and just all walked like he was fucking beef jerky, all fucked up. Probably had some faded, fucked up tattoos. Probably had a couple of ex-wives, a shit ton of fucking, kids and child support. The typical, right? And fucking upset about the man and paying taxes and all that crap. He got trapped in that. And that's the thing. Like we are here to avoid these traps. And sometimes you're gonna fall in it. Okay. You got to get out, learn that lesson, accept it, move on. It's about, like you were saying, the identity. What do you want to embody? Who do you want to be? What story do you want to live? Like,
Yeah.
if your life was a fucking movie, would you watch it? If not, change the story. And how do you do that? By making different decisions today.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. The identity thing's interesting. I know we're going long, but whatever. But the identity way of looking at the world is interesting because it's like when I think of it in my head, I'm like it's almost like a magnet where I am a person and I attract. It's like the plant, right? Like he's sitting here and he's getting watered, he's growing, he's whatever, but it's from the perspective of the plant. His place is seemingly the same. He has the same foundation and principles basically that allow him to grow. But um it's the like with my when I it's not to bring in law of attraction, but it reminds me of that, of like when I have the identity of someone that has a spirit of adventure or bravery or courage or whatever like that. It's not necessarily that I'm reaching for what I want and like trying to discover it. It's just that I'm embodying that. And over time, I start to mold into that
Sure.
belief that I have, the thoughts that I have,
Sure.
the
Yeah.
quality of my thoughts literally uh dictates the quality of my life, right?
Well, of course. And there's nothing wrong with the law of attraction. When we were talking about in the DMs, the only issue that I have with it is when that's the only thing people are banking on, right? Where it's just like, well, if I just visualize and just work on the manifestation, then I'm going to be rich. I'm like, well, you're not going to be rich doing the 9 to 5. You're not going to get big and strong if you don't go to the gym.
Yeah,
You're not going to change your life if you actually don't take physical action in the physical realm. That whole law of attraction stuff and manifestation is about, essentially what are you doing? You're changing your frequency to attract those things that are aligned with that. And it's like, okay, that's well and all, like you're changing your thinking and whatever, but you got to do the shit in the physical realm. It's
right.
just not. It's one
But
thing to be like,
I think that that's evidence that their identity didn't change, right? Because if your identity is someone that has high standards and
yeah,
is a top performer or whatever, like you're gonna behave as if you were that person. Versus
so
what I think what you're describing is like people that you use it as a cope, right? Like use it as a way
yes,
to say, oh, like they're like living. It's the same story of the guys that like live in the past, right? They're like,
same
ah,
shit,
this
dude.
dream is beautiful, and they're kind of
Right.
just deluding themselves so that they don't have to take
Yeah. It's
responsibility.
like the reverse version of it.
Yeah, it's in the future, but they're yeah, wishful thinking, right? The
Wishful thinking. Yeah.
dreaming and things like that.
Yeah. It's like that 55-year-old, and he's smoking the butt of his cigarette, and he's like, yeah, man, when I hit the lottery, fuck these guys.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So, um, anyways, I think it was a somewhat interesting, productive conversation.
I
At
think
least
so.
something to think about.
I think so. Well, let's wrap up the show. The honor is yours, my friend.
The end. We're done.
All right,
That's
guys,
all I got.
make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Wesley's going to start working on the thumbnails so we can get more views and all that. All right, guys, see you on the next one.